Let's jump right into this explainer. Have you ever really thought about the word triumph? We throw it around all the time, right? But the actual history of this word, its bloody, bizarre, and brilliant evolution, totally reframes how we should think about human achievement. Today, we're going to track it from ancient dances all the way down to modern neuroscience. Let's get into it. So, first step, what is the actual difference between a victory and a triumph? Think about your own life. When you pull off something amazing, which word do you use? A victory, a success, a triumph? We usually treat them like synonyms, but if we want to really challenge our assumptions about success, we've got to look at the strict, literal boundaries that separate them. And the difference is actually fascinating. Victory is basically binary, right? It's an objective outcome. You defeat an external opponent in a set, defined system, like winning a football game or a military battle. Success is just an orderly progression toward meeting an institutional expectation. It feels good, sure, gives you a sense of, moderate contentment, but triumph? That is a whole different beast. Triumph requires a dramatic, deeply emotional, existential transformation. It's not just checking a box. It's about conquering immeasurable qualitative obstacles. It is a massive, internal breakthrough. To understand how we got here, we have to trace the physical journey of this word across Europe. It kicks off way back in the 6th century BC as the Greek word thriambos. From there, it jumps to Italy via the Etruscans as Trionfi, morphs into the massive Roman military ceremony the Triumphus, crosses into Old French in the 12th century, and finally lands in modern English as both a noun and a verb. But here is the crazy part. It did not start out as a military term at all. Yeah, that original Greek word, thriambos, it was actually an ecstatic sacred hymn sung in processions honoring the god Dionysus. If you break down the etymology, the Greek prefix three and the Latin tri mean three, and podium means foot. Put it together, and the absolute root of this aggressive, conquering word wasn't a battle. It was literally just a highly stylized three-step dance. It was rhythmic choreography meant to purify fields and act as a bridge between humans and the divine. Wild, right? But then the Romans got a hold of it. And what's really fascinating is how they took that sacred, field-purifying dance and aggressively institutionalized it, specifically basing it on the sheer scale of the bloodshed. To score a full-blown triumphus, a general had to resolve a foreign war and rack up over 5,000 enemy casualties. Anything less, say you just beat some pirates or had a minor skirmish, you got an aviatio, an ovation. You're walking on foot and you only get to sacrifice a single sheep instead of the grand white bulls. Talk about a serious downgrade in pageantry. But if you did hit that 5,000 casualty mark, you triggered a massive civic spectacle. First, you need Senate approval and funding. Then you assemble outside the city limits. On the actual day of the ceremony, the general was essentially elevated to a living god. We're talking a purple and gold toga. He even painted his face and body red to mimic the terracotta statue of the god Jupiter. Then he rides a 4-horse, gilded chariot straight through the city gates, parading prisoners and plundered loot all the way up to the Capitoline Hill. But here's the catch. The Romans were absolutely terrified of tyranny. So, to keep the general from getting totally drunk on his own hubris, Republican morality required a structural counterweight. A state-owned slave was positioned directly behind the general inside that golden chariot. And as the crowds are cheering and treating this guy like a literal deity, the slave holds a golden crown over his head and just constantly whispers, memento mori, remember you must die. A stark, chilling reminder that beneath all that gold and red paint, he is still merely a human citizen. Okay, so how does this massive, bloody military spectacle end up on your gaming table? Well, in 15th century Italy, the Duke of Milan commissioned a special deck of cards with a fifth suit of classical gods called Trionfi, triumphs. Why? Because they possess the power to conquer the other standard suits. Fast forward to France, the game becomes Triomphe, where one standard suit randomly dominates. And by 16th century England, the word corrupts into trump. That's right, the trump card mechanic holds that exact same absolute overriding authority as the Roman general in his chariot. Master writers absolutely loved exploiting this linguistic history. Just look at Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Mark Antony feels betrayed and literally says Cleopatra has packed cards with Caesar unto an enemy's triumph. It's brilliant. Shakespeare is masterfully merging the card game, stacking the deck, with the literal Roman parade. Antony isn't just scared of losing a fight, he is utterly terrified of his legacy being stripped away and used as a mere prop in Caesar's victory spectacle. And Cleopatra shares that exact same dread. She flat out refuses to be windowed and bound to Caesar's chariot wheel for the Roman public to gawk at. Her tragic suicide at the end of the play is, ironically, a profound assertion of self-mastery. By taking her own life, she declares herself the conqueror of myself and completely denies the Romans the physical spectacle they demanded. This marks a massive historical pivot, shifting the idea of triumph from external domination to fierce internal resolve. John Milton took this internalization even further. If you contrast his two great epics, it's pretty clear. In Paradise Lost, Satan gets this loud, outward, completely classical military triumph in hell after corrupting Eden, but Milton reveals it as a grotesque, hollow illusion. Then, in Paradise Regained, Milton pulls off a radical Protestant internalization. The ultimate victory requires zero physical combat, none. It's just Christ's quiet 40-day fast in the wilderness, rejecting the temptations of physical wealth and earthly kingdoms in favor of pure, silent moral resistance. And if we look at the Romantic era, Percy Bysshe Shelley gives us a deeply pessimistic, twisted take in his unfinished masterpiece, The Triumph of Life. He essentially takes the Roman parade and turns it into a terrifying metaphor for earthly corruption. He describes a blindfolded chariot driven by a deformed figure called Life, just dragging a captive multitude of human ideals behind it. Instead of a path to glory, the physical parade is this grand, inescapable deception that relentlessly grinds human aspirations into dust beneath its wheels. Heavy stuff. Now, transitioning from classical literature down to modern science, we find that this exact dynamic, the intoxicating, dangerous nature of victory, is actually measurable in our neuroendocrinology today. It's called the winner effect. When you hit a milestone, your brain creates a powerful positive feedback loop. Testosterone drops your fear in the amygdala, while dopamine absolutely floods your brain's reward system, increasing your focus. But here is the danger. Just like that Roman general needed a slave whispering warnings of mortality, our brains desperately need regulation. Because if these chemical victories run wild, they create extreme overconfidence, serious cognitive distortions, and a profound loss of empathy. Psychologists actually categorize how we react to those chemical successes into two distinct profiles. Using a 14-item psychological scale, researchers separate pride based on how we internalize our wins. First, you have authentic pride. This is rooted in effort. You worked hard and you build status through prestige, sharing your wisdom and empathic concern. On the flip side is hubristic pride. This is identity-based grandiosity. It relies entirely on dominance, force, hostility, and manipulation, which is really just masking deep insecurities. True triumph has to rely on the prestige and effort of authentic pride, not the destructive dominance we saw in those ancient Roman warlords. So what is the ultimate takeaway from the epic journey of this single word? We literally started with a 3-step sacred dance, moved to massive Roman military parades, shrank the concept onto a deck of cards, internalized it through the masterpieces of Shakespeare and Milton, and finally measured it in the dopamine and testosterone of our modern brains. But across all of history, literature, and science, they point to the exact same conclusion. The absolute greatest, most enduring victories happen internally. True triumph is the resilient conquest of our own fears and limitations, not the subjugation of others. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today, but before you go, I want to leave you with a final thought to reflect on as you pursue your own goals. Knowing the ancient, bloody, and biochemical history of this word, and knowing just how dangerous the winner effect can be if you let it run unchecked, which kind of pride is driving your personal victories? Are you building your success on dominance or on authentic prestige? Take a second to really examine your motivations. Thanks so much for learning with us today.